Hello, test, test. Okay, I've never used a microphone before, so this will be great. Hi, my name is Juju, and I will today be presenting to you about leafcutter ants and their amazing fungus. So a little bit before I get started, I am at the university. Oh, no, actually, I started my education at the University of Wisconsin. I was a major of entomology. I'm from San Diego, California, and I learned at Wisconsin that I like bugs and that I don't like the cold. So I decided to continue my education in a place that is much warmer, and that is here at the University of Austin, Texas. We also have a fantastic football team, and I will say that I am in the Department of Cellular and Molecular Biology, which is not entomology, because one of the things I learned also is that there's other ways to follow your passion. And so if my passion is bugs, I don't actually have to continue down the entomology route, but I can find a field that is maybe has a little more funding, right? And that is why I'm in a molecular biology field. And so while I still like bugs, you can actually study them on multiple levels of biology. So if we think about like organismal biology, we think about ants. And then we think about cellular biology, we think about cells. And so my research today is on, that I do today is on molecules. But today, I will be talking to you about just general leafcutter ants. But so if you have questions about my specific research at the end, you can ask me. So my talk today, again, was what are leafcutter ants? We'll talk about the life cycle of an ant and of a colony, and then at the very end, I'll talk a little bit about the fungus and how it actually digests input plant material. So beginning, what are leafcutter ants? Have we seen them around here in Austin? And they're actually very easy to recognize because they're the only ants that if you see that are carrying little leaves, then you know they're leafcutter ants. If they're not carrying leaves, they may be leafcutter ants, but if you see ants with carrying leaves, they're definitely leafcutter ants. And they live all throughout the tropics, and as you can see, we are very lucky here. We have a little pointer, and we are here, and you know this is the most northern part of their range, because they're mostly tropical species, but we get a lot of humid air around here, right? We're very lucky in Austin to have quite a little bit of a tropical climate, and so we get some of these leafcutter ants, and our local species is Attataxana, which is one of 40 different species of leafcutter ants across North and South America. Now, if you go to Europe, you're not going to find them, right? So this is in the New World only. And if you walk around Austin, this is taken in the springtime. You'll see a lot of these like luscious green vegetation everywhere, and then all of a sudden there's nothing. You're like, oh my God, these gophers, they're crazy. They're not gophers, they're ants. So you should go a little closer and carefully, don't touch the ground because you'll regret it. But you can look and you can see a bunch of ants, and they'll be carrying leaves in there sometimes because they're very picky about times of the day, sometimes. And so you can see that they clear away all the vegetation, and this is because they're getting ready for their mating flights in the spring. So the best time of year to go find these clearings and the entrance to their nest is in the spring. And so you get a little closer and you see them bringing in the leaves, and then your next question is, well, like, okay, great, they're going to eat a giant salad or what? What are they going to do with the leaves? Well, in fact, they don't actually eat the leaves. They're actually farming. And so if you dig a hole underground, which I'm telling you not to do, there's actually these fungus farms, and they're in these little cavities underground. You can see here. Am I in the way? Here. And so they grow these fungus farms underground with input leaf material. And that's because they can't eat the leaves, but they learned 50 million years ago that the fungus can break down these leaves. So this is very similar to like we see cows, right? And they're eating a bunch of grass, but the cows aren't the really ones doing the digesting of the grass, right? It's this giant group of bacteria in their stomach that are digesting that cellulose for them. So this is exactly what the ants have learned to do. They're growing this fungus to break down the input plant material, and then they eat the fungus. So that's the next part of this symbiotic system, which I'll get to in a bit. But this is a photo of the colony I have in my lab. You see there's multiple containers. So here in one, there's nothing in there right now, but this is where I put input leaf material, and there's a little tunnel thing here. And you can see these spongy kitchen sponge-like masses, and this is the fungus garden. And the ants live in them, and so that's two. And before I keep going, I'll talk to you guys what a fungus is. So a fungus is its own kingdom of life, right? It's not a plant, it's not an animal. And while plants, they grow using the sun as energy, and we eat popcorn for our energy. Fungus lives on degrading things in its environment. So that's why we see mushroom on some logs, right? And we can eat some fungus and we can't eat other fungus. So this mushroom here, this is toad, right? That we don't eat that mushroom, but we can eat this mushroom. This is a good mushroom to eat. And when you make sourdough bread and you're using the yeast to make your sourdough bread grow, that's also fungus. And then also the mold on it, when you're like, this sourdough is not good, that's also fungus. So we just don't, my point here is we don't really want to classify fungus as neither good nor bad, right? It's its own kingdom of life, and there's many like positives and negatives to it depending on what organism you are. So in this case, with our leafcutter ants, they really like the fungus. They like one fungus. And I'm showing you this here. So here's our mushroom, and this is what we see on like the top of the ground. But in fact, under, there's a huge network of this mycelia. And so this is what a fungus hypha look like. This is a really close photo of some cells. And I'm showing you this to compare to another photo in the future. And so here's our leafcutter ant fungus. And I'm not going to tell you the name. And that's what it is right there. And on 3, we're all going to try to pronounce it, okay? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I heard that. I heard that definitely right. So, Leucoagaricus gongylophoros, and after you say it enough times, you probably just rolls off the tongue. But from now on, I'm just going to continue to say either that, or I'll say the leafcutter ant fungus cultivar. And so that's what you remember that slide I showed you at the beginning? I showed you the map of North and South America and how there's 40 different species of ants. Well, one of the craziest things I think about this whole system is that they all farm the same species of fungus. It's the same one. If you go down to Uruguay and you look in the leafcutter ants that eat the grasses, they're farming this fungus. If you come up here, it's the same fungus. And so now this is actually sort of like the frontier, the field is like, well, it's all the same species. It's got to have, there's different strains in there. There's like the actual genome of the fungus is pretty crazy. So that's sort of like, that's what people are trying to figure out right now. But I think that's really interesting. And so what does the ants get out of it? And I was just sort of getting to this about when they farm the fungus for their food, but they also live in the fungus. And it's this nice controlled habitat underground, and it's protection from everything else that eat them. Anyone? So I showed you, and they mostly eat in the tropics. Does anyone want to guess what eats these ants? Yeah, anteaters, yeah. Okay, so this a fungus. Yeah. And most importantly, though, this whole thing, what does the fungus give back to the ants? So the ants are eating the fungus, and they eat these special little circles called gonglydia. Okay, and so remember I showed you that photo. This was a normal fungus hyphae look like, and now this is our fungus gonglydia. We've got this nice little circle node things. And so inside these little balloon structures, there's everything the ants need. This talks about lipids, and we got nutrients and a bunch of sugars. And so basically what happens is the ants will come in, they'll collect all these leaves, they'll go underground, they place it at the top of the fungus garden, and then over time the fungus will grow up, grow on top of the plants and start digesting them, and it releases the nutrients. And as I said, plants use the sun to grow, we eat popcorn, and the fungus uses all the like enzymes it has to sort of break down the incoming plant material, and it grows onto the plants and increases the garden size. And so this is our system. Oh yeah, also the gonglydia, that's how we get our name Leucoagaricus gongylophoros. So now you know sort of why that's called it is. And so here's what I was just talking about. The ants input plant material, breaks down over time, and then everything that lives eventually has to die. So now what do we do? What do we do with this fungus that's sort of left over? And I was just telling you the ants farm, and now I'm telling you that the ants are going to take out the trash and they're going to put it in a dump. And that sounds crazy, but that's exactly what they do. So there's this dump, and they have a special container in my lab, but in nature it's its own little like cavity underground. That's the dump. And so when they're done with all the spent fungus and spent food, they'll take everything that they no longer use and they move it into the dump. And this is really important because this farm, this is like a monoculture for them, really, right? This is everything to the colony. And so they are very protected over this garden. And this is why it's crazy, because if you see workers outside that are working in the dump, they're not allowed in the garden. And they're not allowed in the garden because they contain a bunch of like little microbes that are walking around their body that can go into the garden and that can cause a lot of problems, right? We don't want our garden taken over by pathogens. And in fact, while I'm only talking about 2 members of the symbiotic system, there's like research is crazy because they've actually found there's all these different types of other organisms are only live in these systems, such as this other fungus called Escovopsis that is the main pathogen of Leucogericus gongylophoros, and it cannot be found anywhere else, and it only lives to break down this fungus. So the ants are very protective of this fungus garden, right? It's their farm, and so anything that any plant that comes in is sort of like cleaned and processed before it's even allowed in the garden, and so it's also gardened by all these ants that make sure there's no other ants that are walking in that are not supposed to. So this is very cool. All right, and so this is what we generally call the ants have a symbiotic relationship with this fungus, and so here's the whole cycle is sort of telling you about the ants liver plants the garden, the fungus garden breaks down with these enzymes, these lightning bolts, and then here we have the ants eat the gongolidia, and then now the ants have energy to go search for food. Okay, so now I showed you this photo of my colony, and so now here 3 at the bottom of the fungus garden, the gongolidia, and then all the way over here is the dump. And I took this photo like a few years ago, actually. But over time, the dump just grew and grew and grew, and it was crazy how much like biomass is moving in and then moving out. And so it's just very interesting to watch. All right, so how big can they really get? So here's a photo of a lady. I think this was taken in Argentina. And what I also like about, so you can see how tall this mound is here. This is not our species of leafcutter, by the way. This is down south. And then I like in this photo because you can see this little trail here. And so you walk around and you can actually see these trails. But I will warn you, there's another ant out there in Austin called the harvester that will make similar trails. And those ones you don't want to mess with. So just make sure they're carrying leaves, right? All right, so this is what happens if you dig something like that up. And this is sort of a famous photo in Brazil. This was what, like 2012, maybe like 10 something years ago. And so, right, you can see here that all these little bubbles, these are those cavities underground I'm talking about. They can either have gardens in them or they can have like little areas of processed plants. So these can be thousands of chambers, right? Thousands of those fungus garden chambers underground. This is 23 feet. That's like 2-story building, right? And it consists of millions of ants. And millions of ants at like any single point in time. So then you sort of have to wonder, like, how many eggs does the queen lay? Like, how long does an ant live for? How many freaking ants live in that thing, right? And so, and again, how long can this thing live for? And that's really as long as the queen lives. So that's what we'll get into in a little bit. But besides that, though, like they're so big, and so they're also so abundant. And if we think about Africa, we have all the vegetation, and we have like all these animals that are eating the vegetation. We have like what, giraffes. We have antelope. We have all these like large mammal herbivores. Can you think of any large mammal herbivores in the New World tropics? Maybe like a tapir, and there's not many of those. Yeah, and that's why it's crazy, because actually, these are the main herbivores of the New World tropics. These guys are doing all that vegetative like herbivory, so they're responsible for 17% of the leaf like degradation in the tropics. And what's really important about them is they're not just consuming them, right? But they're taking all the leaf litter and they're moving it below ground. And so this is like, they're the key drivers of the nutrient cycle in the New World tropics. This is really important. So this is what we call a keystone species. Okay, so now we're on to the life cycle of an ant and of colony. So how does it all get started? And I showed you that giant photo, and I mentioned that there's a queen, right? Like all ants have a queen. This one also has a queen. So how does the queen sort of like start something like that? And so this is ants have what we call the caste system. So I'm showing you here a photo, and is anyone? This is all actually. How many species of ants do you think this is? Yeah, so this is one species of ant, right? So this is all one species of ant. So here's our queen. Here's our queen, still queen, no wings. And this is like a soldier. And then we have all these other ones. And these are not, that's not a baby, that's an adult. And that's an adult too, and that's an adult. And just because they're smaller doesn't mean that they're babies, right? It just means they have a different job. So these physical differences also lead to behavioral differences, and so this is what we call polymorphism, and the ants have what we call a caste system. And so a caste is like, oh, this is one caste. Caste A goes to take out the trash. Caste B, they actually have names, not A and B. All right, so here's a photo of an ant life cycle, and the ant's life cycle is like that of butterflies, right? Or that's like the most obvious one. We have a caterpillar, doesn't look anything like a butterfly. Like bees are actually the same way, but there's not too many times that you see a baby bee. There's also not many times that you see a baby ant. So a baby ant looks like this blob here, that. And they're inside the garden, and if you see one, you're also probably getting bitten at the same time. And so these are also the pupa, and so here we have a queen, lay the egg, get the larva at the pupa, and now we have our worker ant. This is what we call complete metamorphosis versus what incomplete metamorphosis is what you'd see like a grasshopper. A baby grasshopper looks basically the same as an adult grasshopper. Okay, so here's our queen. So she's the original ant that sort of started the whole colony. And I'm showing you two here specifically to confuse you, because our leafcutter ant, Adatoxana, actually has the ability to have two queens in a colony, which is actually unique to our ant species. And so she can live for anywhere 10 to 20 years. That's 10 to 20 years, right? It's the same queen. That's crazy. And so that means if there's a million ants at a time, she lays thousands a day. And that's one of the reasons those things can get so big. So besides her, after we have our eggs, this is in the nursery. And so the nursery is in a little pocket cavity of one of the fungus gardens. And I took this photo here, and I think it's a great photo because you can sort of see everything. Here we have some eggs. They're small. And here we have larvae. And then you'll notice that this pupa is a little darker than this pupa, and that's because this pupa is about to hatch. And then here's our newly emerged worker. He's a little lighter. She's a little lighter than this worker here. So she just came out of the pupa, and now we have our worker. And as I said, none of the dump workers go into the garden, right? This is the same way. No other workers go into the nursery. So the nurses are actually the ants that just hatched. So you hatched, and you immediately go to work. And you've taken care of the other babies, because you don't want any outside pathogens coming into the nursery. This is the most important part. And so here's our nurseries. And then we have some other ants. So the smallest ones, these are the garden workers. They're very, very small. And they're so small that their little mandibles perfectly can grab those individual hyphal threads and move them around the garden. And then we have these waste workers. I've already talked to you about them. So they're not allowed in the garden. And these are the ones you'll probably see the most. They'll see the ones cutting the leaves. So they have special mandibles that are perfect to cut through tough leaf vegetation. And then we have other ones that work in the assembly line to bring the ants back, right? So these are all different castes of ants. And then here's some of my favorites. So here's the soldiers, and these protect the colony from invaders. And, okay, so I work with the ants, and people are like, do they bite you? Do they bite you? And I'm like, sometimes I'll see them on my skin, and I'll notice when they're trying to clamp onto me, and I'm like, get it off, right? But it doesn't ever break the skin. I don't ever bleed, and they don't sting either. So they're actually nice to work with. Except for these guys, right? But you only get the soldiers once a colony reaches a certain size, because they sort of require a little bit more resources to make soldiers, right? They're a little more hefty. So you're only going to get the larger colonies that actually produces these soldiers. And so one day in the field, I saw one, and I've always said, I'm like, well, I'm not going to make it bite me, but if it tries to bite me, I'm going to pay attention and see what happens to see if it actually will break the skin. And I thought, maybe it would take a couple of tries for it to bite my skin, and no. It was just like immediate paper cut. I saw it on me, and it didn't hesitate and just scraped it. I'm like, oh my God. And of course I screamed, flicked it off, and I was like, oh my God, that was so cool. Yeah, okay, so these are the other ones. These are great too. Does anyone want to guess what these guys are doing? Or are they just lazy? What? Puppet show? Yeah, I haven't heard that one before. That's good. No, so actually, in the tropics, there's these parasitic flies. And the parasitic flies will fly around, and they'll try to lay an egg in our little worker ant here. And so to prevent the parasitic fly from laying an egg in the worker ant, because he's busy carrying this giant leaf, we have all these little other ants that wait on the leaf, and they shoo fly. So that's their job. I'm not making this up. I'm serious. All right, so now back to our ant life cycle. So we sort of talked about all the workers. And then you're sort of wondering, well, like, what about the queen and the male ant, right? And so how does a queen get born? Well, from the very beginning, a queen will lay little larger eggs. And these larger eggs will get fed more protein by the other workers. And eventually, we're going to get a giant pupa, and eventually we'll get a giant queen. And a new queen is called a virgin queen. And a drone, and males are called the drones. And this is actually interesting if you know, I haven't talked about DNA, but I could. But females, all the ants are females, right, besides the drones. And so the females are diploid. They have 2 copies of their chromosomes. The males only have 1, so the males are haploid. So when a queen wants to lay a male ant for reproductive, she won't fertilize her egg, and so she'll just lay a male. And the males only appear in the spring during the annual neutral reproductive flight of the ants, which if you go to Arizona looks like this. And it's really cool because it happens once a year. And it will be cool if you like giant insects flying around in the sky in front of your face. And so luckily, or unluckily for me, the mating flights in Austin, the ants are very particular, and they like to fly 15 minutes before dawn on like when the temperature can't drop below 62 degrees, and it has to be the first rain of the season, and like rain, a half an inch of rain the night before, and it has to be 95% humidity. But if it rains after midnight, they'll go back inside. So like you're never going to see this happen. But if you want to, you can come find me. Maybe we can go in April. But I can't show you a photo of it because they fly and it's dark outside. So these are the Arizona ants, and they fly in the daytime. So after the flight, the queen will go mate in the sky, and she'll go to the ground. And along with her, she has this little piece of fungus, right? She'll go in the ground, and she starts fertilizing it with some sterile eggs, and you get this little plate here, and it becomes a little larger, and it becomes a little larger. She's all by herself, right? And then soon if you're lucky, if you found a mated queen, because that's not common at all, and you'll get these little larvae, and you see the little pupa legs, and then you can, once they hatch, you can start feeding them little plants, right? So then the workers cut up all the plants, and then they integrate it into the garden, and they grow and they grow. And then it becomes this one day. So it's very cool. And so part of my research, I've had to start a few colonies of my own because I only had one, and for like experimental statistical significance reason, you can't just do experiments on a single thing. So this was a part of my research, was collecting new colonies, and it was so much fun, and it was like half my work. Which should not be anyways, a lot of work. So here's me in Costa Rica. I just got back in February. I was doing research on the Atocephalotes, which is another species of leafcutter. They have longer legs, and the soldiers have like white blonde hair on them. And you can't really see it in this photo, but you can see it's very dense back here. And when you're going in the tropics and you find a leafcutter, you're just like walking to a clearing, and you're like, what is wrong? Like, this is like huge area with no plants. And so here's some photo of a fungal hyphae sort of breaking down rows. And then these are some close-up images of the gongolidia that I took recently. They look like little puff balls. Those are the enzymes in there. And with that, thanks for your attention, and I'll take any questions. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to bring the microphone around so that everyone in the room can hear you, and also so that people on Twitch can hear you, and that you're on the actual recording. So, hands, please.
Oh, sorry.
With the 2-story building, I mean, if you disturb that, what happens?
What happens if you disturb it? A lot of ants crawl out and attack whatever they can. Or like disturb it like from the surface, or like bulldozer? Do the ants seize the bulldozer? I mean, I don't know. I've never seen someone try to do that. It's it. Oh, you mean the fungus garden? Oh, it's very delicate. The fungus garden itself is very delicate. And I would imagine the soil around it has to be sort of dense enough to hold itself, but like, I'm sure you'd dig it out. I wouldn't imagine it to be a little less dense than the normal density of the ground. Does that answer your question? Sort of. What would happen to it? I think you'd destroy the colony. Yeah. Nobody would die. I don't think so. No. They don't sting. They don't sting, but they would tear your skin apart. Yeah.
Well, how was that photograph made then? How did they actually dig it out?
They poured concrete. It was an old colony. The colony no longer alive. The queen had died, and so they were like, They knew it was a big one, so they poured a bunch of concrete in it, and then the concrete goes and it settles in the empty cavity spaces, and then you can see they sort of dug out the still dirt.
If the ants are all separated, the workers that are in the dump stay in the dump, how do they share food between these different areas?
Yeah, so ants do trophallaxis. So the baby ants that are working in the garden, they'll sort of eat the gongolidia, and then they go feed it to some of their sisters, and then the sisters feed it to the other ones. But also, and this is not entirely uncommon when it comes to insects, but the adults don't necessarily need as much protein as when they did when they were growing up. So a lot of them, while the gongolidia contains all the most important proteins, lipids, whatever, the foragers will sort of get some energy from the plant sap that they're cutting up. So they don't. That's like little fast sugars, right? But they're not growing anymore, so they don't need a lot of building body nutrients. Yeah. Oh.
Mine's a two-parter. Is the queen the one that determines what type of ant egg she's laying? And then if that's true, how does she determine what kind of ants she needs to lay? How does she get that information from her colony?
Yeah. So the queen does not determine what type of worker size will come out of the egg. She does determine when she lays the queen, so lay larger queen eggs. But when it comes to the worker size and the distribution of the workers, that the size of the worker is a little bit determined by temperature and what time of year the larva is developing, and also how much food the larva gets. And all those, how much food the larva gets is determined by the other workers feeding them. And ants communicate by a lot of sensory pheromones around, right? They live in a chemical world. They'll walk into a space and it'll mean one thing, and walk into another and mean something else. And so I think there's a lot of work still to be done on this area, and a lot else I could probably read in that sort of realm, because it also varies a lot by ant species. And so for leafcutters, once the density, probably an ant density, population density reaches a certain size, I'm sure there's a signal that says okay, now, and also now we have enough energy to make the soldiers. Because at the beginning, you're going to get one size of ant, right? And then the workers will probably, once there's enough here, then we feed these larvae more or less food until they become larger or smaller.
You mentioned that the dump ants are sort of kept away from the gardens. How do they take sort of the decomposing matter away from sort of the gardens to the dump then? How does that handoff happen?
Yeah, it's like a one-way street. Yeah, so they call the dump workers the untouchables. And this is my question always, because so Okay, so I watch these things all the time because you'll go into the room and you're just like, you forget your to-do list and you just stare at the ants, right? And so you see the garden. At the bottom of the garden, you see a little crumbles of like dried out looking fungus. You're like, okay, this is the dead fungus. And you'll see some ants and they'll collect the like dead garden here. We're still in the garden room. And then somehow that ends up like in like a middle area. It's like a processing ground. And so I'm assuming that maybe those garden workers will go traverse to that area. And then the dump workers, maybe there's another processing, because sometimes the dump is like really far away. So maybe there's another middle ground group of ants that's sort of transferring it a little bit in between. But then, and so maybe also the dump workers are like the oldest ones. So it's like when we go to war, we send our like 19 and 20-year-olds, right? They get in the draft. When the ants go to war, they send out the old ladies. So the dump workers are usually really old, and they're sort of expendable, right? They're not the young ones anymore. So the oldest ones, maybe it is their time. Maybe they're like, all right, we're going to go work in the dump because we'll just work here for the rest of our life. So maybe they take some and they go there and they don't return. But another key part of the dump is not like their only job is taking it from the garden to the dump, but they also like recycle the dump. It's like a compost, right? They got to move it over and over and over again for whatever reason. There's many reasons, but it's sort of interesting. Yeah.
Do you only research ants, and how did you get interested in this field?
I am working on a paper about the cochineal bug. I don't know if you know what that is. But that's not really, that's just a that was like a beginning rotation project of mine. This is solely my focus besides that. This is what my thesis will be on. How did I get into ants? This is a crazy story. And I don't know if I have time, but maybe I can tell it quickly and try to convey how crazy it is. So, as I mentioned, I was at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and at the time I was there was a famous professor, Cameron Curie, who was in the microbiology department. And Cameron Curie, he had like this leafcutter ant colony like embedded in the wall of the microbiology building. And Wisconsin is very cold. And so I'm walking to my entomology building, and it's very far away, and I'm trying to go through as many buildings as possible because I don't want to be in the cold. And the microbiology building was brand new. It had all this money, and I'm walking through it one day, and I see the ants, and I'm like, what the heck? Why are the ants in the nice building, and I'm in this little dump over here? And that's when I first realized, like, oh my God, like you can study like bugs in a well-funded field. And so, whatever, I love entomology. I graduated in entomology, but I think the leafcutter example just sort of stuck in my head. I'm like, and that's when I learned there's so much more to these ants than just the ants and the fungus. There's all these microbes. There's so much stuff I haven't talked about today. And so I was like, oh, I definitely could. That's so cool, right? And so then COVID happened, whatever. I graduated. I couldn't, for whatever reason, I took a job in like molecular biology, and I decided to go get my PhD. And I want to get my PhD in molecular biology and not entomology because of like job applicability or whatever. And so I go to Texas without deciding on ants. I was like, no, I'm just going to go get molecular biology, RNA, DNA, whatever. And so I arrive, and there's an old graduate student who, well, also, I almost went to go find some other entomology programs, but I decided Texas was like the better fit, the safer option. So I come here, and then an old graduate student is on his way out, and he knows I like bugs, and he asked me, hey, I have this leafcutter farm, do you want it? And I'm like, what? I'm like, yes. So he puts it down in my little lab space, and then like 2 days later, a professor comes up to me who doesn't know me. He says, are you Juju? I saw your ants, I wrote a grant. Do you want to do the research on the ants? And I was like, what the heck just happened? Like, yes, of course, this is crazy. So I ended up at Texas. Didn't decide to do the ants, but the ants found me. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, one last question from Twitch. Is the ants fungus safe for humans? And if so, have you tried it? Is it good?
I don't want to even try. I don't want to try it. I think I've sampled it. not tasted it. I've like taken it out. I've touched it before. It doesn't look edible. It doesn't look like it would taste good at all. Yeah, it's like. Yeah, maybe he could try. That'd be a good goal for him. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great talk.